When Henry Ford told the architect Albert Kahn that this is what he wanted him to design, Kahn thought he was crazy.
Kahn was not the first one to think that Henry Ford was crazy.
Kahn couldn't imagine why anyone needed so much uninterrupted space under one roof. But Ford would need it to introduce his moving assembly line.
Remember, Henry Ford was a visionary and a dreamer, and he saw things that no one else saw.
This concrete-framed factory was light years ahead of Ford's previous plant. The Piquette plant was typical of the time, with its thick brick walls and narrow windows. It was dimly lit, and the space was broken up by timber posts. Henry Ford was using this old-fashioned factory to build a very modern product. His Model T had a user-friendly design that allowed just about anyone to drive and maintain it. So he just couldn't make them fast enough, right?
Exactly. He had to get out of there into larger quarters.
Albert Kahn was the perfect architect to design a factory for Henry Ford. Kahn, after all, was the guy behind the earlier Packard Building Number 10. Today, it's abandoned, but when it was built in 1905, this was one of the first so-called daylight factories. They had huge windows and wide-open floor plans, thanks to their reinforced concrete frames.
Kahn made it possible for the kind of vast open space that is flooded with light.
This is what Henry Ford wanted, but he and Albert Kahn would make an unlikely pair. Kahn was Jewish, the son of a rabbi. Ford famously published The International Jew, which suggested that Jews were plotting to control the world. Do you know if Kahn ever brought it up?
Kahn never brought up the issue. He really said by implication, it wouldn't do any good, and all it would do would be to damage my business relation with him.
Despite their differences, Kahn and Ford teamed up to change the face of American industry just outside of Detroit. Highland Park's broad walls of glass supplied plenty of light and fresh air to the factory floor, which was good for workers and Ford's bottom line.
It improved workers' comfort.
And therefore productivity.
And therefore productivity, yes.
The sheer enormity of the complex not only allowed Ford to make most of the Model T in one place, it also gave the company the space to experiment with a new way of building cars. Before the assembly line, each Model T had been put together on wooden sawhorses by teams of assemblers who all moved from one car to the next, and all the parts had to be dragged to each car by workers known as pushers and shovers,
who would spend a lot of time going to other parts of the factory to bring parts for the one car they were working on.
But the vast, uninterrupted spaces at Highland Park made it possible to move the car through the plant and to a long line of workers, each with a single part and a simple task to perform over and over again.
It saved enormous amounts of wasted motions, and it brought an enormous reduction in the cost of making Model Ts.
But Henry Ford still wasn't satisfied. He felt that the 4- and 6-story spaces at Highland Park wasted time and energy moving parts up and down. So remarkably, just 5 years after opening Highland Park, Ford asked Albert Kahn to design an entirely new single-story plant.
Henry Ford was not bashful about dropping something he thought was outdated and moving ahead with something new.
Over the next 30 years, as Henry Ford constantly improved his production process, he would call on Albert Kahn to design more than 1,000 factory buildings. And like Highland Park and every American factory that came after it, these buildings would have wide open spaces that were filled with light.
Ford and Kahn were very much an unlikely duo, and yet Kahn's plan for the Ford plant set the pattern for American industrial architecture of the 20th century.